as I mentioned before, I come from a little town. Actually, it's just it's called a ward. Actually, it's Young Ward, and it's just outside of Logan, Utah. And Logan at the time had maybe about 15 to 20,000 people. And so I climbed on a plane and flew into Milan, Italy, which has about 3.5. At that point in time, it had about 3.5 million people. Now, I'd been to Salt Lake City before. It was probably about the biggest city I'd ever seen in my life, and I had no idea that cities could get this big. But when we first got off the plane, one of the things that really was a little bit disconcerting as we get off the plane, and in the airport and all around, there were these young 18-year-old, really boys, the same age as us, standing in the airport with machine guns and so forth. And I was like, "Whoa, what are we getting ourselves into?" But it's because the military is obligatory over in Italy at that time, and so every young man served for, I think it was about a year or something in the military. And so they would, a lot of times, I didn't know that they didn't actually most of the time have even, bullets in their weapons, but they were nevertheless walked around with machine guns, and that was a little disconcerting. But then the impressions were when my first area, well, first off, we ended up going to the mission home. They came and picked us up in our cars, in the mission cars, and we went to the mission home, which was in this palazzo. It's a building. It wasn't a standalone building. It was with other businesses and things like that. And I remember for the first time meeting my new mission president, Samuel Boren. And he came in, and I tell you, it was just an interesting. He came in. How's your family doing? And how's this and so forth? And he came up and just gave me a big old bear hug and everything. And Elder, we're so glad to have you here and so forth. And but we've got a lot of stuff to get going. So we're going to get you to your area, and if your first area is going to be right here in downtown Milan. And I was like, okay, let's go. So, but it's interesting how missionary work has changed over the course of time. One of our primary methods of conducting missionary work at that point in time was we did street. It wasn't really tracking; it was street boards. We call them. There's like a three-legged sign that had graphics basically on the sides of it, and if we could store it. There's somebody that had so we could store it at night. So we'd go out there in the day, and then we'd go right to the big palazzo. It's called the Duomo. It's this huge cathedral, this massive cathedral that took over 200 years to build, and we would just be down below that. And you get people coming from all over, and and business people are traveling and so forth on these sidewalks there. And so we'd put up this thing, and then we'd basically just invite people to take a look at these signs, and then see if we could get their name and number and set up an appointment to go and talk to them about it. And I remember being totally intimidated. So here I am in this huge city next to this gigantic Catholic cathedral, and we have this little board. And even though, for the last 2 months we've been studying Italian, what these people were speaking sure didn't seem like Italian that I was learning in the MTC. So I was listening very closely, and my companion would urge me to try to strike up a conversation. Of course, most people would just walk by and kind of ignore you or whatever, and so we'd try to get their attention somehow and so forth. But it was kind of a baptism by fire, I think, at that point in time. It was fun to go out and do that and set up the appointments. But I loved going to the appointments, but we didn't have cars and we didn't have bikes, so we completely relied upon the mass transit system of the city of Milan. And it was a big city. In fact, our district, we had 3 districts within the city, and my first district actually included the city central part. And I just found it fascinating. There were, in fact, I'll never forget. In Milan, there was, this cathedral, and there's several other cathedrals and so forth. But just how old things were. Everything here in America was 100 years old or less. It seems like in my world, up in Cache Valley, Cache Valley was a wilderness area, 150 years ago, and hadn't really grown an awful lot. There was homes and so forth, but Italy is a completely different thing. In fact, I'll never forget when I was serving in Piacenza, which is a smaller town. So, but they had the celebration for basically the birthday, if you will, of the city of Piacenza, and they were celebrating their 2,500 year anniversary. It was amazing. Yeah, they had people dressed up in period costumes from 2,500 years ago, before the time of Christ. The city had been established. And so that was quite an amazing thing. Italy is an amazing place. It's beautiful. There's mountains. Although one of my other areas the second area that I actually served in was in Torino or Turin, which is where the shroud of Turin is located there. And we had this apartment was up on about the 12th or 13th floor, and luckily that one actually had an elevator, so we could take the elevator up to the 12th or 13th floor, and it had a balcony there, and I'd served there for about a month and a half or 2 months, and then there was this huge storm that came through, and it was towards the summertime when I was there, and this big storm came through. And I walked out on the balcony one morning, and lo and behold, there were mountains. I had never seen the mountains before because of the kind of the low-lying, kind of smoggy stuff that was going on in the city. And there was these beautiful, huge mountains. The Alps were, you could begin to see the foothills of the Alps there. And that was just beautiful. But the parks and places, the people are absolutely phenomenal. They are most of the people are very happy, very friendly. They love families. They love friends. They like having a good time. And so really, there was no time when I really felt in any way at risk or that kind of thing. I did have an interesting experience though one time where my companion and I were just going down this one particular street that came to a T, and as we were walking down this street, all of a sudden we heard this big boom, this big explosion, and we're like, "Whoa, what was that?" And so we kind of ran up to where the corner was. We could look around the corner, and there was a hotel, I think it was, that was there, and there's a car bomb had gone off and just obliterated this car, and there was just a couple of axles sitting there in the street, and just fire everywhere. And we said, let's get out of here. But the mafia at that point in time was alive and well, but we never really had any run-ins with any of that kind of stuff. It was for all intents and purposes, that was the only thing that I really saw in my mission that was mafia related or whatever. But you didn't go into some of the seedy areas. There's certain areas you would kind of avoid, and the mission knew all about that, and we were pretty much off limits to go there, so that wasn't a problem.